So welcome everyone to this Digital Navigator 101 webinar. We are really excited for the opportunity to share all the foundations of the Digital Navigator model, built on all the things that we've learned from our community in the last 3 years and even before that. So we're grateful for that opportunity. And that is what we'll get started with today. And let's get going. We're going to start with a welcome. So welcome. We're so glad you're here or watching this recording. We're going to go through some key definitions to get us all on the same page. And then we're going to talk about what is a digital navigator, which is what we're here today to do. We'll talk about what the digital navigators do, who they are, and who they serve. And then we're going to end with some opportunities to engage with the community and any questions that we can get to from our in-person or our live attendees today. I'm Abby Waldrop. I've already started talking, so I'll just continue. I'm the Senior Digital Navigator Manager at NDIA, and I have a background in libraries and supporting digital inclusion work there. And I'm really grateful to be able to do that with the NDIA community now because it built so much of my understanding of this work when I was on the other side. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm based in Durham, North Carolina.
And
Hello.
I am Lo Smith. I'm a senior programs manager here at NDIA. And one of the areas that I work on is digital navigators with Abby and our team. I also have a background in libraries. I spent 9 years in public libraries before I made the jump to digital inclusion work full time. And pronouns they, them. I'm based in Baltimore, Maryland. But over the last week, I've kind of been hopping around the country, so you may have seen me somewhere else. And just a quick introduction also to our organization. Now that you know who we are, you can learn a little bit more about NDIA. We are the National Digital Inclusion Alliance. We are a nonprofit organization that really supports our community programs, equips our policymakers to act, and brings together thousands of folks and organizations across the country and the world, as well as our territories and our tribal entities. Taking a look at the numbers on this slide, I want to tell you that by the time you view this, these will be out of date. We are a growing community filled with really fantastic people, all working towards the common goal of digital equity, which, speaking of, is a term that we should explore. So some key definitions. Often we hear digital equity and digital inclusion used interchangeably because we're so excited about the direction in which our work is going. But to really break them out, to understand some of the differences in the ways that Abby and I will be using them, as well as the National Digital Inclusion Alliance, let's talk about it. We see digital equity as the condition in which all individuals and communities have the information technology capacity needed for full participation in our society, democracy, and economy. Basically, that's where we're going to go. We want everyone to be able to get up to whatever they'd like to online safely in a healthy manner and have those opportunities to go to school online or just scroll TikTok. We don't care. We just want that opportunity to be there. Digital inclusion, those are the activities necessary to ensure that everybody, even the most disadvantaged, have full access and use of information and communication technologies. That's the work that we're doing right here. This is all the things we have to do to get ourselves to digital inclusion. And that little box on the bottom, if you want to snap a picture of this slide for your future usage, definitely do that. The digital divide is the issue, the digital inclusion is the work, and digital equity is our goal. And when we're thinking about some of these elements of digital inclusion, we know there are a lot, but specifically the ones that we're going to be touching on today are just going to be these four. And it's truly the road to digital equity. These are our building blocks. We're talking about affordable and appropriate devices for our community members, that ongoing technical support that makes those devices useful and makes them valuable to our community. We're thinking about affordable, high-speed internet for everyone, and the digital skills training that make those devices, that internet, and that technical support really, really worthwhile and useful for our community members. So you'll see these trends showing up over and over again in what we talk about today and in the future.
So what is a digital navigator? Digital navigators are one model for digital inclusion work. So those things that Lo just talked about, this is just one way that people achieve that work. To just put it very simply, one definition for digital navigators is that they are trusted guides who address the whole digital inclusion process, including home connectivity, devices, and digital skills with community members through repeated interactions. So digital navigators are somewhat similar to caseworkers. With empathy, they assess needs, recommend resources, and provide support throughout the process of accessing those resources. The term digital navigator and the digital navigator model emerged from the NDIA community in 2020 when the start of the COVID-19 pandemic sort of changed our work. So if we're using this metaphor of a tree to illuminate kind of how we talk about digital navigators, imagine the roots under the ground to be all of that existing digital inclusion work that had been going on in so many different ways and so many excellent programs for a long time, but they reached the surface level when those programs needed to change due to the pandemic. So what emerged from that need was a need for one-on-one, ongoing, holistic digital inclusion assistance that was cultivated by NDIA and our Digital Navigator Working Group. We created a foundation, which is this trunk of the tree, that started with the definition for what is a digital navigator, as well as some template materials and those programs that piloted the digital navigator model in our community. Many of those early programs operated over the phone and provided on-demand support with really urgent needs. Since that time, the digital navigator model has flourished into something that is very flexible and adaptable. So if you imagine the branches of this tree to be all the different kinds of digital navigator programs that exist now, there are so many different ones, and they go in a lot of different directions. So they still may respond to urgent needs, but most digital navigator programs are also working with folks on their long-term goals. And in addition to those general digital inclusion support types of efforts that they were making, we also see digital navigator programs that are providing very specialized support for specific needs like telehealth or workforce development, and specific populations like people with disabilities, returning citizens, and higher education students. The model continues to grow and be adopted to new scenarios, and NDIA continues to act as a free hub of free tools and shared resources, and also a place for the community of practice to discuss what those best practices are for digital navigators. In no way do we own the model. We don't have a copyright on the term digital navigator. There is no copyright on that word, but everyone is welcome to implement the model in a way that works best for their community, and it is our goal to continue supporting that in every way that we can. All right, so now we know what a digital navigator is. Let's talk about what they do. Another attempt to very simply put this, that digital navigators consistently provide holistic, individualized support through repeated interactions. Holistic means that clients receive simultaneous support for the interconnected elements of digital inclusion that we saw on that road earlier. The individualized part means that clients are supported to meet their unique goals in a way that works best for them. And that consistent and repeated interactions mean that clients get long-term support, ensuring that the solutions really work for them and they're able to reach all their goals. And maybe a little less simply, we have a bit of a kind of a flowchart graphic of how this work happens. So starting at the top, the digital navigator will meet with a client and ask a set of questions to assess their needs and see what kinds of resources and assets they already have. And then together, the digital navigator and the client will evaluate and discuss what they've learned and the options that they have for meeting those needs. So these conversations will include things like what the community member prioritizes, how they prefer to have their needs addressed, and what their goals are, and as well as the specifics of the needs that kind of emerged in that first part of the conversation. So then the digital navigator will refer that client to some resources, and we'll talk a little bit about what that looks like in a moment. Lo's going to share some specifics of that. But what's really important is that the resources meet all the needs that have emerged. So that's going to include digital skills, appropriate devices, and affordable broadband. So any of those that are still needed for that client will be given to them at that point, resources that they can use to meet those needs. And then the client may go separate at that time and go access some of these resources, or the digital navigator may work with them more closely as they start using those resources. But then at some point, they will come back together to check in and evaluate their progress, learn if the resources provided really met their needs, if they are moving towards their goal, and what new needs they may have that the digital navigator can help with.
So on that first step, we really looked at the assess and evaluate needs and goals. Initially, this was called assess and evaluate needs, but what we're doing here is we're working with our community members' goals as well. So specifics digital navigators should learn about, really getting deep into those client goals. What do they hope to learn, and how are we going to get them there? Another big key is exploring those existing skills and resources. It can be really easy to overskill and over-resource a community member. If they are joining us and their goal is to get really good at using their Gmail, we might want to find out if they were really great at using their Yahoo Mail before, and it's just about a skills transition. We also want to talk about our clients' priorities and preferences. That whole individualized, holistic approach is specific to how are we going to do this together and how are we really going to make sure that you are served for your goals. Just because something works for me and Abby doesn't mean it's going to work for everyone else. So digging deep into how do you like to learn? What do we want to do? And how fast is too fast for making it through our specific learning goals? Some of the resources that we have to share for y'all include our intake form and our skills assessment so that you can kind of figure out where your community members at, how you can contact them again, which is a really great piece of information, and just checking in on where we need to get started. We also recommend our good friends at North Star Digital Literacy. They have a digital literacy assessment online. So if you're working with somebody who might be remote or you really want to test out their practical skills because they don't know all the words for all the stuff that they can do, that's a really fantastic tool to have as well. So now that we have gone through assessing and evaluating the needs and goals of our community member, and you've done a skills assessment and measured exactly what it is that we're looking for, we can talk about supporting the digital skill learning of our community members. Digital navigators usually end up assisting this in 3 ways, but again, I'm sure there are other programs out there doing this slightly differently. We'd love to know more. The top one that we often see is referral and coaching through existing digital skills resources. One of the great things about being part of a community like NDIA or the Digital Navigator Working Group or any other sort of digital inclusion organization is that you have connections to pre-existing tools and resources. We don't have to build this all ourselves. We can find self-paced learning resources online and classes that our community member might really flourish in. Another option could be providing one-on-one instruction. And that could look like meeting regularly to help a community member out, just guiding them through processes, or sitting next to them and letting them know every now and then where you can help them. We've also seen our digital navigators lead group instruction, whether that group is 3 folks sitting in a room or a whole classroom, having everyone move together and really build those digital skills as a group. One of the resources we've got is actually a blog post that I wrote. It's about some digital skills resources that you can use rather than having to build all of your bits and pieces of your program from scratch. But now, if they've got those digital skills, how are we thinking about accessing those affordable and appropriate devices? So there are 2 ways that we've seen our digital navigator programs really do this. Directly providing devices is fantastic because you really know the digital skills that will go into supporting that device, the kind of technical support needed, and you will be fully versed in everything that could go wrong or well with that device. There's also the option to refer to device programs. And quite often we've seen folks getting direct referrals to nonprofit refurbishers and other nonprofit programs in their area. But if there isn't a program similar available, wherever we can find those device programs have been really, really useful for community members. The thing is, all digital navigators should be prepared to provide advice on selecting that device and to have a conversation with their community member so that they know that they're getting the right device for their needs. And we do have a couple of resources on this as well, including a little one sheet from our time that we created to help folks really choose, figure out what device may work for them. And as digital navigators, having conversations about our sort of whole person device needs can be helpful in making that decision between a Chromebook or an iPad. And next, and absolutely not last, we've got our different types of connectivity. So we're thinking about providing appropriate and affordable broadband solutions. We have to really understand what's available in our areas. And I think for each one of us, even house to house, neighborhood to neighborhood, we're seeing different types of connectivity available. So it's useful to already know what's going to be out there and how can I get my community member connected to it. We have to be prepared as digital navigators to really discuss the pros and cons based on our community members' needs. One of the things that I often think about is where are we going to be using this home internet? Is it worthwhile to have it tied to our home, or is it something that should move with us? And I think the top thing that my digital navigators that I've always seen have flourished with and really, really been able to help folks out with is how to access the free and low-cost options that are available to them. Specifically in our resources, we have our free and low-cost internet plans page. Here at NDIA, we maintain this resource because we know that there are free and low-cost plans in many, many regions that are being underutilized. Some of these plans may have income requirements, but there are options that do not. In addition, we also have our ACP resource page, as the Affordable Connectivity Program is one of the top options currently for low-cost and free connectivity options. And I'd like to bring us back around again to the Digital Navigator process. Abby just took us through this in the very beginning, and now we've taken you down this road through assessing the goals and needs, evaluating and discussing solutions, referring to those relevant resources. There's one thing that I'll ask you, other than those digital equity and digital inclusion definitions to snap a picture of, it's this one right here. This encompasses what sets a digital navigator apart from all of the other fantastic folks out here doing digital inclusion work, and helps them to keep and build and maintain their program.
All right, so now we all fully understand what a digital navigator does, or at least the basics of the process and the work they do. So let's think about who these digital navigators are that are doing all this work. I mentioned earlier that they are similar to caseworkers and that empathy is important. And we sometimes hear people asking about IT professionals. Do they need to have a lot of technical skills? And we have found that a strong foundation of basic technical knowledge is useful and important, but they don't need to be really IT professionals. They don't need to be able to build a computer from scratch or solve everything that could go wrong with the computer, because a lot of the technical skills can be taught. But these are the qualities that we have found to be more important when choosing people to be digital navigators and hiring or selecting digital navigators. And the number one thing that we have found and have heard over and over, and we completely agree with, is that digital navigators work best when they are members of the communities that they serve. So a lot of the things that fall under that, not all of them, but some of them will come with that territory. So being culturally competent and being able to speak in a language that this community understands and be trusted by that community, those things come with members of their own community. Sometimes that's built into that. Other things that we think are important that we look for are digital navigators do really well when they're empathetic to the people that they're working with, that they have patience. We have heard this over and over, and it was just reiterated to us this week that patience is really important for being a digital navigator. They need to be problem solvers who are ready to be co-learners with the digital, or the clients they work with. The digital navigators may need to learn some new things that they are teaching, that they're being asked about. They may not know because they aren't IT professionals, and we can't all know everything about everything. If your digital navigator is really familiar with Microsoft and PCs, and then they work with someone who is using an iPhone and Apple products, they're going to have to do a little learning there too, probably. So being a problem solver and being ready to take on that challenge together is really, really helpful and makes a better environment for learning for those digital navigator clients. They need to be trusted and reliable. So there needs to be a basis of trust on the kind of person that this community would trust, but also they themselves need to be reliable so that they can continue to build trust with the people that they work with. It helps if they are, service oriented, and it can work with good humor to really solve problems together with the people that they are working with. And of course, it takes a lot of flexibility and adaptability to meet so many different needs and to support people with so many different goals, and to work through things that can be a little difficult, like completing signups for different kinds of programs are not always the easiest thing. So having that flexibility is best. There is a baseline job description that was developed by NDIA and our Digital Navigator Working Group. It's available on our webpage, which we will keep pointing to because there are lots of free resources there. But if you are looking for somewhere to start the job description, that is one place that you can find them.
So often we hear, well, where do I find a digital navigator and how do I make a digital navigator? And we've outlined some of the specific areas of training that we have found common within different digital navigator trainings. Often the importance is that orientation. And so we developed the initial training model for digital navigators that included about 6 hours for the groups that work with us. And then we've seen the objectives and the pieces of the training. They're really about understanding digital inclusion and equipping them with resources. But also, in addition, we have compared our training model with other fantastic digital navigator trainings across the field. And there are some awesome groups doing them, so shout out to all of them. But here are the commonalities I think that I've really found. It's that orientation and understanding of digital inclusion, an understanding of the digital divide based in data and research, understanding our audience and their needs, those community members that we're going to be working with, what are we really expecting to hear from in our goals, asset mapping and resources, including understanding the digital skills frameworks that are out there, understanding our internet options, the affordable connectivity program, getting well versed in all that. And also the evaluation and reporting side of things. When we mentioned those forms earlier on, that's a really key part of training a digital navigator to engage in this work. Often I have had people ask me, what do I need to teach my digital navigator and how long do I need to train them? And as long as our digital navigators have some foundational understanding of all of these areas, often some on-the-job training and observational training will help them to work out the rest of what it takes to be a digital navigator. But as Abby said, IT knowledge is not needed. You don't have to have a complex technical vocabulary to be a digital navigator. Frankly, great listening skills and an understanding of the tools at your hands are going to be enough. And when we see our digital navigators after they've been trained, well, who are they and where are they being staffed? So we've seen a couple different ways that folks have been able to implement digital navigators into their organizations. It's a super flexible model, and you can see that you can implement it for a variety of situations. We've seen existing staff, and that was the Southeastern New York Library Resources Council, and I saw a few of them in the room. They cross-trained 77 existing staff in libraries and community-based organizations to act as their digital navigators. We've seen cohorts of interns. So our city of San Diego, they hired 13 digital navigator interns, and they embedded them in those community-based organizations so they'd really be deep in the community and serving. We've also seen the full-time staff model. That's where we have the National Digital Navigator Corps, and that's a project of NDIA, so we're very proud of those folks. And they're organizations in rural areas or that serve tribes that are each hired a full-time digital navigator that is dedicated to that community. And specifically, we've seen folks popping up in all of these different ways, but really looking at that word community that appears in each one of these staffing models.
Yeah, and just to build off of that discussion of where the digital navigators are based out of, or who hires and trains and supports them, the most important thing is that digital navigators are based in trusted organizations in their community. So some of the places that we've seen this happen and work well are social service centers, community action agencies, any kind of community center for a specific population. Workforce development centers, senior centers, libraries are very popular for digital navigators. And we have seen some innovative programs with 211 and 311 centers or phone lines as that referral source. So the key thing to remember here is that the trust is really important, and the trust must be with the community that's going to be served. So it's digital navigator programs typically have a target community that they're working with, which we'll talk about in a moment. So if you are starting a digital navigator program that's going to target a specific part of the community, it's important that you address whether or not your organization is trusted by that community. So if it's an area of your town, or if it's a certain group of people that you've never served before, starting a digital navigator program doesn't necessarily mean you will immediately be trusted by them. And just because an organization is very trusted across a community doesn't mean that it's trusted for that specific group. So it's important to keep in mind that the trust with the organization will change depending on who your audience that you are working with. And we have seen digital navigators in a lot of different kinds of community organizations. So I would not limit to those examples given here to be very broad and thinking about where there's trust in the community, where people access things that they might need support with. So anywhere that they meet a need for digital navigator support, and if digital inclusion aligns with that organization's mission, then that might be a good fit for a digital navigator program.
So who do our digital navigators serve? We have already told you where you might find them, who these digital navigators might be and what they know. But let's talk a little bit about the folks that they're serving. And I tend to always joke that when I say this, I'm like, they serve everybody. because there have definitely been moments in the last week that I could have used a digital navigator. I went too far. So often it can be a little bit daunting when your thought is like mine and you're thinking, well, they serve everyone, which is why programs should be and are identifying target clients in their communities based on need and aligning with their organizational mission. As a librarian for so many years, I often felt the weight of needing to help and support everyone in my community. And it wasn't until I really began doing more digital inclusion work and narrowing in on the folks that I could support as to the best of my ability within my organizational mission that it really felt like we were beginning to experience great change. So thinking about some examples of targeted communities, the Denver Public Library, who are doing fantastic work, they offer digital navigator service in their branches in neighborhoods with high numbers of digitally disconnected households. They've identified where, and they're prioritizing those communities in their work. Seattle Housing Authority targeted English language learners and partnered with local organizations to provide assistance in Somali, Vietnamese, Spanish, and a bunch of other languages specifically. And this was a community who had direct access to these English language learners. The Digital Connect Initiative at Gila River, they partnered with their Elder Center. And I know often we hear a lot about working with community elders and seniors to pair digital skills learning circles with meals and provide instructions on tablets distributed by the tribal council. So identifying where they've already really made those community connections and doubling down on the devices that were already out there. If you're interested in more of learning how to identify your target areas or picking out exactly where you might find folks, you can check out our data and research page. And I forgot to note, don't worry about trying to grab links from us right now. We're going to send those all out after the webinar. And for all of you who are viewing this webinar and are recording, there will be links somewhere as well, I promise. So you'll be able to take a look at all of those later on. Some examples, and I think, sorry, I gave you guys a preview of this one, and some examples and some impact stories are really, really strong when we're thinking about how our digital navigators are working and who they're serving. And this is also a time where I invite all of y'all to share an impact story in the chat. Having a chat on in a webinar is not standard for most webinars, but we want to hear from you. Tell us your impact story. Specifically looking at some of these impact stories that we've seen where the one-on-one interactions mean that those community members are getting that specific support. And taking a look at Christina, who is a client of the Salt Lake City Public Library's Digital Navigator program, which is actually one of our first pilots that we worked with. She needed a digital navigator. She discovered the digital navigator from the newspaper. And she gained the digital skills instruction that she needed. And I really, really like to take a look at the line of, she says, I think that's because I don't speak computer language. Here you can see that that digital navigator acted as a translator to help get Christina oriented and online. And also looking at how these repeat interactions are building that community connection, highlighting our friends in Arizona, as well as in the Hamden Public Library in Connecticut. We see that Chris's small business was assisted. He could not have gotten that business up and running without those digital navigators. I like the fact that they called it all this crazy tech knowledge when we emphasize digital navigators are not tech geniuses. They don't know how everything works. They're just great at communicating how we can move through technology and build those connections. And the digital navigators at the Hamden Public Library were building that self-confidence, the social emotional tech learning. And one of the things that I often hear when I'm talking about how do digital navigators actually get everyone all the digital skills. And I often say, I don't need my clients to know everything. I need them to become confident in themselves and knowing what they can figure out on their own and have the confidence to also ask me for help. So taking a look at how they could build the confidence of their community members at their library is really fantastic. And also highlighting the digital skills support. I always like to think specifically about Ronnie in this instance. Ronnie had a strong background. He had a degree, he had work history, but the thing that he knew he was lacking were those digital skills. And often with our community members who are older, who may be more experienced in the workforce and in the world, may not know where to turn to for that guidance and support. As a result of this, Ronnie was able to explore different careers in his retirement and really find joy working online.
I want to share a story that we recently heard from one of our National Digital Navigator course sites in New Mexico. So Jemez Pueblo Tribal Network has some digital navigators, and they have provided devices to members of their tribe who may have never had a computer before. You can see some photos here of those computers being distributed, and then the certificates they received when they completed the learning that they had outlined for going with those devices, because digital skills paired with devices is always important to go together. They looked for tribal workers who worked in the field and didn't have access to a computer during their workday, so it wasn't a part of their job. And then they were able to purchase computers for them and teach them the skills how to use it. And then they were able to use that computer not only for a few things that they might need it for at work, but also in their personal lives and in their community. They had new skills and a device that would work for all of that. And part of the reason that they are so successful is they are extremely trusted in their community. They are members of their community. They speak Toa, their native language, in the meetings with their clients and in their teaching. So it feels extremely relevant in a way that someone who from outside of the community would not be able to make that teaching and that instruction and that relationship relevant to those community members if they had not been part of that community. And Computer Reach is another example that I would love to share with you. They were beginning a new program. They are a long-lived digital navigator and digital inclusion program, but they were starting in a new location in a different community. And so part of their goal there was to begin building trust right away across the community. And they were able to provide devices and training to their nonprofit volunteer fire department, which built a lot of trust in their community because people trust their first responders and their friends and family and neighbors who volunteer at that fire department. And they were also able to support an increase in public safety across their community in a way that impacted everyone that lived there right away when they started their program. So you can see there's a quote here from the fire chief that says, "With access to critical devices and comprehensive digital skills training, the project has brought us significantly improve our life-saving emergency services and enhanced our response capabilities to fire protection and other critical situations." So it really did change the lives of everybody in this community and made them safer. And it also established that trust and helped them establish in a new community where they do have a digital navigator who's a member of that community, but the organization hadn't worked there before. And I know this led to other partnerships across the community. The fire chief is involved with their local senior center, and so helps get them set up there as well once they got started. So those are a few stories about who can be impacted by digital navigators, the kinds of folks who find the services really useful and life-changing and support them in their goals and what they're trying to reach. We would love to hear your stories, so feel free to send them to us anytime. We're going to try and make it even easier for you to share those as we move forward, and you can continue to share them in the chat. But I want to wrap up our presentation portion by just making sure you have everything that you could possibly have to get started building on the work of digital navigator programs that have existed before and accessing the support that we hope to provide at NDIA. So the first of those is just another plug for our webpage that has a lot of the different resources. It includes some of the definitions and the descriptions that we talked about today, as well as the job description, the forms, some one-pagers that you might use to help get other people on board and share information about what your digital navigator program works, or how it works, or how it might work if you start one. We're also going to include a version of the slides that we are using for this presentation so that you can reuse them if you need to do a presentation about why a digital navigator program is a good fit for your organization or how it might work in your community. You can use some of this that has been built for this presentation, so that will be available there as well. And we continue to update it continuously, so always check back for new things.
And we'd love to know more about your digital navigator program if you have one. We have just a quick form where we're collecting a bit of information. We're hoping to use this information to connect digital navigator programs to each other, learn more about models so that we can really have y'all helping each other out, building those community connections, as well as possibly creating a database to make sure that everybody is able to connect with the community members around them. Digital navigation doesn't just happen in our individual communities, but it's a group effort with all of us out there working together and learning from each other. And specifically speaking of community and group efforts and learning from each other, we encourage you, if you're not already a member of the NDIA community, and I see so many names that I know joining us in this webinar today, that I know we have many, many fantastic community members, we encourage you to become an affiliate. It is free. And basically what it means is that you get access to our listserv, our tools, our monthly community calls, a monthly newsletter, but you also become a member of a greater community of over 1,400 organizations all across the country, the territories, and 23 tribal affiliates, making sure that we can help connect you to your neighbors who may be able to collaborate with you, or maybe someone halfway across the country or perhaps the world who has a really fantastic model or a question or just needs some advice. So join us, use our listserv, and use us to help you get where you need to go.
And one of the ways that we work every month to connect people with the community of practice of digital navigators is through the Digital Navigator Working Group, which you have heard mentioned many times today, I'm sure, because I mentioned it many times throughout all of my days. But it was the group that started very small and worked together to define exactly what this model was, and give us feedback on all the resources we created and started those pilot programs. There is a graphic on the slide that demonstrates how much and how quickly it's grown. Which I think demonstrates how much people really relate to the Digital Navigator model and find it extremely useful for their communities. So you're also welcome to join this community of practice. We have a monthly call where we discuss things about digital navigators, and we have a little mini listserv that is open for people to ask questions. And we often see people asking, has anybody created a resource like this? Because I think we need one. And usually somebody has one, or is willing to work together to create one. So it's a great supportive community that can help you as you get started as a new digital navigator, if you are starting a digital navigator program, or even if you're just looking to connect with people who are doing similar work to you. One of the things we didn't mention yet today, I believe, is that the term digital navigator is really useful to help connect people in situations like this, in groups like the Digital Navigator Working Group. But we know not everybody calls their program a digital navigator program. So if you're thinking this sounds a lot like what we do in our work, but we don't call it digital navigators, that's okay. If you would find this community to be useful to you and you think you're involved in similar work, we would still be glad to have you as part of the group. And we believe that you would probably be very valuable in helping build our understanding of this work as well. So I think with that, we are going to move to Q&A. I know we have a few questions in the Q&A function, and we also have some in the chat that we are going to get to. So Lo and I are going to kind of take turns answering those. So I think I might just start here with this first one in the Q&A. I'm going to hit that answer live button and see if that works. So how important is having the same individual doing all the steps of the process with a particular client? I would say very important. I think this is part of why the Digital Navigator model works so well, is because it's really built on a relationship and built on that trust that comes with that relationship. So there are flexible points in this. There can be flexibility, but I do think as much consistency with the same person as possible is great. So if Digital Navigator is Lo and I'm a community member, every time I have a question, I can come to Lo with that question. And I know we had a conversation on the first day about what resources I already have and what my goals are. And then when I come to Lo next time, they are going to remember that, or they're going to have a note somewhere that they can read to remind themselves of that. And I don't have to repeat myself. And, I feel like somebody's really listening and understanding and caring about me. That said, intake is a place that we do see some flexibility. So it might be that there's a front desk where people come in and some of the intake information is collected, and then they are referred to a digital navigator who's going to follow up with them. So that's, one place. We also know that when it comes to the actual resources, so if should maybe pull up the chart again, but Lo talked through some of the different pieces of, devices, skills, and connectivity. Sometimes the digital navigator is going to refer to someone else to provide that support. So if you have a device refurbisher in your community that you partner with, your digital navigator might make a referral to them to say, if you contact them, you can get, you qualify for a free computer and they'll help you get that. Here's their information. This is how you get a hold of them. And then that digital navigator might call back next week or set another meeting with that individual and to say, were you able to get your computer? Did you run into any trouble? But they're not the one actually giving that computer in that scenario. Which can kind of go for any of those. There could be a digital skills class. There may be another place to access connectivity. So the digital navigator may not be doing all of the support, but they are ensuring that the support is effective. That was a long answer. Lo, did I get it all? Did you have anything to add to that?
Yes, I have one thing to add, which is we understand that digital navigators are people, and that working with the same person may not always be possible. While we do encourage those relationships, we have seen that in order to maintain boundaries, work schedules, and other things, often Abby and I may need to tag team as digital navigators with the same client, which is really, really critical to making sure that those relationships are built across the team. But when you have the right team of digital navigators, everybody should almost be the same. But as you can tell, Abby and I are quite different people. But if we were working with a community member, I'd like to think we'd give very, very similar service. Maybe I would have more jokes and puns, and Abby would be a little bit more serious. But this actually leads me into the next question that I wanted us to answer. And I'm going to hit the answer live, which is, I will be starting as a new digital navigator. What kind of records do digital navigators need to keep? Because as Abby referenced in that last piece of working with the same individual, it's really critical to take notes on the specifics of what your community member is hoping to learn and the specific needs of their learning process. Among the records that you need to keep, and I am going to hand this off to Abby for the other critical pieces, because Abby loves data. And I love working with somebody who loves data, because it's great to pass off the bigger questions. But I always think keeping records of the work that you've done together, and also not just the really nuts and bolts, but the emotional experience. Like, I was working with Abby, and when we started working on writing an email, she really perked up and was happy, because this is the first time that she got to email like her cousin in Costa Rica. And so finding the moments that really bring your community member joy are just as critical to keep in your notes as just Abby learned to write an email today. Because that will help us to remember that our community members are people, and if we can help them to always find joy and success in every interaction, they're going to want to keep coming back to hang out with us. But Abby, can you tell us more about all of the records we've got to keep and how to keep them safe?
Yeah, well, what I can say is that our goal today was to tell you what a digital navigator is and why it works so well. And if you want to know how to do a digital navigator program, and some really specific things like what kind of data people are collecting and how are they collecting it, the Digital Navigator Working Group is a great place to go for that. We have a lot of resources that we have internally that folks have shared about how they collect resources, and so we keep those into in a Google Drive folder where you could access some of that. And you can also discuss and ask other people how their programs do it, because there are a lot of different ways to do it. We recently had a presentation in that group of a lot of different platforms that people use to collect information about the Digital Navigator interactions. So that's something that I could point you to. So I think I'm sort of copping out with the answer to say, email me if you are interested in joining the working group, and I can get you connected to those resources and those people who have that really great information. So that would be my answer for that. Okay, we get to move on to another.
Yep. Oh, I've got a question for you. It didn't come in. It was somewhere else, not in the Q&A. We found that volunteers work as digital
I'm going to
navigators?
ask you that, Lo.
This is
Lo,
the problem. We both see the same question, and we both want to ask the other one their thoughts and feelings. I'll start. You follow up? So the good news is volunteers, we've seen skilled volunteers and trained in decentralized and coordinated digital navigator programs. I think we've seen them in like Charlotte and in Columbus. One of the things that we often see with digital navigators that are volunteers is that consistency may come up as an issue. So knowing your own volunteer core, what their consistency is like, how often and how committed they are to the work, may inform whether or not you're choosing to do a volunteer-based program. We also do caution for some other staffing models that if you're offering lower pay or more part-time or sort of casual employment, you may see higher rates of turnover similar to the rates of volunteers. I think I've covered my points on volunteers and sort of like casual, occasional digital navigators. What have you got, Abby?
Yeah, I think when the volunteers are successful, they in this kind of program, they're very bought in, and they're very dedicated, and that has led to that success. We could again point you to some people who have done that, and you could talk with them about what works and what doesn't work. I think if you have other successful volunteer programs in your organization, they might be a good option for you if this is something that you all have already figured out how to do and you have a basis of people who are committed and bought in, kind of volunteers. But it's going to be important that it's not just volunteers. There has to be somebody kind of leading the charge, keeping track of things, and there have to be some requirements like collecting that data, because it's really important that nobody gets slipped through the cracks of a Digital Navigator program, and that can really lose you a lot of trust in your community. So it's important that you have some kind of fail-safes and some plans built in for that kind of thing. Okay, another question that we got in the chat rather than in the Q&A is, could Digital Navigators assist libraries in becoming community technology hubs to eventually enable community-owned internet infrastructure, which is a very specific to a specific end, but I can answer the first half of your question and say that Digital Navigators are really logical fits into libraries. I think that is why we saw so many early programs in libraries, because it fits the mission, as we talked about, of Digital Navigators. The mission of digital inclusion fits with the mission of libraries, and it also fits a need. People come to libraries to use the internet and to use computers, so they are likely to have questions about that there, and may have opportunities to help people get those devices and that internet connectivity at home, so that they don't necessarily only have that option at the library. So it's a good fit for those reasons. It's really important for libraries to distinguish what the Digital Navigator does from what a general reference librarian or other person working in the library is able to provide, because there can just be a little bit of internal confusion, as well as the fact that a Digital Navigator is meant to dedicate time helping an individual. That's built into the program. So it needs to be understood that the person who is doing Digital Navigator services in the library is able to commit that amount of time to an individual, rather than just answering question and then continuing to be available for like an entire computer lab or something like that. That said, it can be a great fit because then, for example, the question we hear about a lot in libraries and in computer settings is, I need to reset my password for my email. I need to do it every day. I come back once a week and I ask you to do that. So with a Digital Navigator, actually helping somebody to learn how to do that in a way that makes sense to them, that they can start to do that on their own, and they don't have to ask that question every week. So that dedication of time is an investment in the future of that person, rather than just answering the question they have right now. Lo, what do you think about libraries?
Definitely. I do think that Digital Navigators are a fantastic way to lighten the load on librarians who are experiencing a ton of tech questions, offering a ton of program, and truly are a community hub. We've got, I think, one last question that came up in the chat, or in the Q&A. I love when everybody uses the Q&A. Thank you. It keeps me organized. I work in community engagement for a for-profit internet service provider. Is there anything I can do to begin a Digital Navigator program from the for-profit side? We've seen this model. So there's some fantastic work being done in partnership with for-profits. And I want to ask Abby about a couple of them that she knows about and has worked with, and then I can also chime in on some other really fantastic partnerships we've seen.
Yeah, I can also give some examples of ISPs that have Digital Navigator programs. I think there is going to be some similar things to what we talked about with the libraries, is the distinguishing the role of the Digital Navigator versus the role of, say, just a customer support representative. So that everybody inside the organization understands the difference between that, and that people outside the organization understand the difference of that. So they're not just calling to say my internet's not working right now. They understand that they are asking for more long-term support in different kinds of areas that would be important for them to understand. I also want to just go back to what I mentioned a few times about the mission of the organization and the trust of the organization. So if the part of the mission of that organization is to ensure that everyone is able to connect to high-speed, affordable internet, and that is something that they can demonstrate through their work and their actions, then that is maybe a better fit than an ISP that doesn't have that as part of their mission. And that it may be difficult to build trust. As an ISP, we just don't see that they are the most trusted organization in a community. Typically, like nonprofits would have like a higher rate of trust than an ISP. So that might be a challenge that would come up that you would have to think about, how you're going to handle that. And when we've seen Digital Navigators in that setting, there is typically an understanding that the Digital Navigator is available to support customers and non-customers, people who aren't actually ISP, customers of that ISP. because that does help build the trust and fits the mission of the work that is done, and that their work would not involve selling the ISP's products as part of their mission. That they would, for example, if they're helping someone find connectivity options, let them know all the options they have, not just the ISP. That is a much more effective digital navigator. So those things kind of come to mind as important to keep in mind when you're doing that. I wouldn't say that it's impossible, but it is challenging in some ways. Flo?
Yeah, and Abby really covered the fantastic work we've seen by digital navigators embedded in those ISPs, but we've also seen internet service providers who have partnered with local community-based organizations, maybe to offer some training or fund some program development. When you have that partnership, you can ensure that you are going to be able to build that trust and work together. There are many, many community organizations that could just use the boost of staffing assistance, capacity assistance funding, a far number of other things that come with having a digital navigator that can be a little bit harder to leverage if you are a small org. So reaching out to smaller organizations to offer the skill set, the funds, the infrastructure that an ISP may have can be fantastic. But we do always want to caution, and just the reminder that ensuring that everybody is going to be trusting and knowing all of their options. We always talk about outreach and marketing as different things. So making sure that your community members are being served to the best of their ability. And just because you're a for-profit ISP doesn't mean you are excluded from the digital navigator world. We're happy to have you here. We're happy to help you find your fit.
And I would be remiss if I didn't mention the great work that we're seeing out of tribal ISPs, which have typically a very different service model than other larger for-profit ISPs, because they are typically owned by the tribe, and that comes with a whole different set of priorities and an amount of trust in the community. So sometimes when we talk about these examples, we are referring to those ISPs and tribes that have a very different situation, but we have seen them in other non-tribal ISPs as well. But I want to mention that great work as well. And the example you just shared, Lo, I know, believe the Spokane tribe has partnered with their library to make sure that they have digital navigator services that they weren't able to provide. So that's
awesome. We've got another question in the chat we've got a couple questions in the chat. The one that just popped up are there specific marketing materials we can use to help to promote this program? And I do want to plug that Abby has mentioned that the slides that we used for this are available on our website if part of your marketing is promoting it internally in your organization or externally to community partners. Abby made these fantastic slides as a template to help you explain digital navigators to folks around you. So highlighting that piece as well, but other marketing and methodology, Abby?
Yeah, I think we have some great examples. I will just keep mentioning the Digital Navigator Working Group is just extremely generous. And so if you want to see some examples of what people have used for their programs, another thing that I'm not sure that that bears repeating, I should say, is that there is not a centralized directory of all of the Digital Navigator programs in the world. All the Digital Navigator programs in the world don't work with us necessarily, and they're not necessarily part of the working group. So this is not something that folks would have as a one Facebook ad that we all use for our program, because the programs are very different. But we can point you to some examples, and folks are usually very happy for you to copy and paste and reuse their things, because we are all doing the most with the least possible. So we would definitely be able to help you connect to some of those in the working group. And I would also, this answer goes for Lavanda's question as well. Looking for a platform that allows individuals to register for free training classes and allows us to track data and create reports. We have a list of those that people have told us that they are using. So if you connect with me, I can make sure and share that with you to get you some examples of platforms. Some of them cheap or free, some of them expensive, and we can also connect you to the presentation that people use. So definitely shoot me an email, and I think this is a good time to also put our emails in the chat one more time, and maybe for the first time. I think they were just on the slides before. So we'll get our email addresses here so that you can reach out to us about any of these things that we have said we can connect you with, especially if you'd like to join the Digital Navigator Working Group. We would definitely get you connected there and all the resources that they have shared with us. Okay, that takes us to the end of our questions. Unless somebody is able to slip in one last quick question, we are going to go ahead and wrap it up. And thank you again for being with us today. We are really, really grateful for your participation, for the contributions of many of you all in your Digital Navigator programs and your other digital inclusion programs that led to our better understanding of how this work happens, and your contributions to the working group as well. And we are excited to learn about some of you who may be newer to this field and to the Digital Navigator model as you reach out and we get connected to more stuff. And somebody did get a question in, didn't they, Lo?
Oh, is there another question? Did I miss it?
All right, as you're leaving, last question. Can you touch on best practices for checking in and evaluating progress in that step of the Digital Navigator process? Hello?
Yeah. So one of the pieces about evaluating progress is being very responsive to the community member we're working with. Yesterday, I actually got a great question. I was chatting with somebody at a different event, and they were like, how do you evaluate a Digital Navigator program? And one of my thoughts was a big piece is asking your community members how they're doing meeting their goals. We set that goal to have a measurable place to go. And so if your community member is regularly following up at the end of their interaction saying like, I didn't feel like I'm any closer to meeting my goal. I don't feel like I'm making progress. I don't feel like I'm being successful. That's a point to reflect, take a look and say, how do we do this better? But if your community members during their check-ins, during those moments where they're wrapping up, they're saying, oh yeah, absolutely. Like I'm getting closer to building an online business, but today I learned about my email. I'm getting closer to building my online business, but today I learned about Google Business. That's where you can really watch that growth and sort of check in. And when it comes to evaluating, you can also use those digital skills assessments with regularity, coming on back to those and saying, hey, we did that first digital skills assessment and you were new to everything. Let's do it again. Let's help you to see the way that you've grown. And it really comes down to one-on-one, individualized, asking folks, did I fully serve you? Did I answer your question? Did we meet your goals? Abby, what have you got to finish up this last question?
Just gonna add a very practical potential answer is that people a lot of times meet with their clients once a week for an hour. That's kind of standard, or 45 minutes as the limit to the number of meetings, or maybe at a less frequent cadence if that's useful for the client, but people do often have regularly set meetings. So that's how they make sure that happens, or they call to check in if they haven't seen them. Okay.
Well, the top of the hour. Actually, we're going to go hang out with the Digital Navigator working group. So it's been so great to chat with all of y'all. And thank you so much to everything that y'all have shared. We will see you in the future. We will hear from you in the future. And if you're somebody who is joining us in the recording, we can't wait to see you and meet you. So thanks so much. Anything left, Abby?
That's it. Bye.
All right. Bye, y'all.